Ryan Matthews stood at the window of cabin 5, phone pressed against his ear, watching January snow dust the pines outside Evergreen Summit Retreat. 300 miles from Seattle, higher than he'd driven in years, and still not far enough to escape the weight crushing his chest. Sophie's voice crackled through the speaker, small and uncertain, in a way that made his throat close. "Daddy, when are you coming to get me?" He closed his eyes, counted to 3 the way the court-appointed therapist had taught him. Breathe. Stay steady. Don't let her hear the fear. "Not today, sweetheart. Remember? You're spending this week with Grandma Catherine and Grandpa Richard. I'll see you next Saturday." "But I don't want to stay here. They have a pool, but I miss our apartment. I miss Mr. Hopper's." The stuffed rabbit. The one Amanda had given her for her 3rd birthday, 2 months before the accident. Ryan's fingers tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. "Mr. Hopper's misses you too, baby, but he's safe at home waiting. And Grandma and Grandpa love you very much. They just want to spend time with you." What he didn't say. "They want to take you away from me permanently. They think I'm not good enough because I don't have a mansion in Boston or a trust fund or the right last name. They think their daughter married beneath her, and now that she's gone, they can correct that mistake by erasing me from your life." Sophie's sigh carried 3 years of grief she was too young to fully understand. "Okay, Daddy. Grandma says it's time for piano lessons anyway." Piano lessons. At 6 years old. Because Catherine Pierce believed early cultivation of refined skills separated the worthy from the ordinary. Ryan bit back the response that wanted to come, the anger that would accomplish nothing except making this harder for Sophie. "You're going to be amazing at piano, Sophie. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." "Love you too, Daddy." To the moon and back. The line went dead. Ryan stayed at the window, phone still pressed to his ear, staring at mountains that didn't care about custody battles or dead wives or the way grief could hollow out a man until he forgot what it felt like to be whole. The retreat had been his attorney's idea. Sarah Mitchell, the 3rd family lawyer he'd contacted after the first 2 declined to take his case against the Pierce family's legal arsenal, had looked at him across her cluttered desk and delivered the truth he'd been avoiding. "You need to appear stable at the continuation hearing, composed, not like a man barely holding himself together. Take a week. Go somewhere quiet. Rest. Because Richard and Catherine's attorneys are going to paint you as emotionally unstable, financially insecure, and inadequate. You need to walk into that courtroom looking like none of those things are true." So here he was, Evergreen Summit Retreat. 7 days of enforced solitude in a rustic cabin that cost more per night than his monthly grocery budget. His savings account would feel this for months, but Sarah was right. The hearing in 2 weeks would determine whether he kept primary custody of Sophie or whether the Pierces succeeded in reducing him to supervised visits twice a month. The weight of it sat on his shoulders like a physical thing, pressing down until breathing took effort. He turned from the window, surveying the cabin's main room. Stone fireplace, leather furniture worn soft with age, kitchen opening onto a deck that overlooked a frozen lake. The kind of place Amanda would have loved back when she was alive, and their biggest problem was deciding between hiking trails on Sunday mornings. Amanda. Dead 3 years last October. Car accident on I-5, black ice and a semi-truck, and the kind of random tragedy that shattered lives without warning or mercy. 1 minute he'd been a husband and father, building a quiet, ordinary life. The next, he'd been a widower, trying to figure out how to braid Sophie's hair and explain why Mommy wasn't coming home ever again. The Pierces had been supportive at first, grief-stricken themselves, wanting to stay close to their only grandchild. But somewhere in the 2nd year, support had curdled into something else. Suggestions that Sophie needed more structure, better opportunities, advantages Ryan couldn't provide on an IT security analyst's salary. Then came the lawyers, the custody filing, The expert witnesses explaining how a single father working full-time couldn't possibly give a child what wealthy retired grandparents could offer. Ryan had fought back, because what else could he do? Sophie was his daughter, his. The piece of Amanda that remained, the only light in the darkness that had swallowed him after the accident. But fighting required money for attorneys, time off work for court appearances, and a composure he didn't genuinely possess when Richard Pierce looked at him with barely concealed contempt, and Catherine spoke about Sophie's future as though Ryan were already a regrettable footnote in it. A door opened somewhere in the cabin. Ryan's head snapped toward the sound, confusion replacing grief. He'd paid for a private cabin. The confirmation email had been explicit. Cabin 5, single occupancy, 1 bedroom, full week. Footsteps crossed the wooden floor. A woman's voice, crisp with exhaustion and irritation, drifted from the entryway. "I don't need a refund. I need privacy. That was the entire point of booking this specific package." Linda, the property manager, responded with professional apologetics. "I completely understand, Miss Morgan, but we had a plumbing emergency in Cabin 7 last night. The guests staying there needed immediate relocation." Cabin 5 is our largest unit, 2 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, completely separate living spaces. You'd barely cross paths. Ryan moved toward the voices, dread settling in his stomach. This couldn't be happening. He'd come here specifically to be alone, to not have to perform normalcy or maintain the careful mask he wore everywhere else. The woman who appeared in the doorway to the main room stopped when she saw him, her dark eyes assessing him in the span of a breath. Mid-30s, expensive cashmere sweater over designer jeans, the kind of polished appearance that spoke of corner offices and carefully managed success. Her hair was pulled back in a bun so severe it looked painful, and the exhaustion around her eyes suggested she'd been running on empty longer than she cared to admit. Linda gestured between them, maintaining her professional smile through what was clearly an uncomfortable situation. "Mr. Matthews, this is Elena Morgan. Miss Morgan, Ryan Matthews." I was just explaining to Miss Morgan about the cabin arrangement. Ryan found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. "I paid for a private cabin." Elena's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, of a fellow person at the end of their rope. "So did I." Linda's apologetic routine continued, offering reduced rates and future credits and assurances that they'd never even notice each other in a space this size. Ryan watched Elena's face as she calculated the cost of leaving against the cost of staying, saw the exact moment she reached the same conclusion he had. Neither of them had anywhere else to go that mattered. "Fine, I'll make it work." Linda's relief was almost comical. She walked Elena through the cabin's layout, pointing out the bedroom wings on opposite ends, the bathrooms, the kitchen stocked with coffee and basic provisions. Ryan stood to the side, silent, already planning how to minimize interaction. Stay in his room. Hike during the day. Exist as little as possible in shared spaces. When Linda finally left, the silence that filled the cabin felt heavy with unspoken rules. Elena wheeled her suitcase toward the west bedroom without looking at him. "I'll try to stay out of your way." "Same." The door to her room closed with a soft click. Ryan stood alone in the main room, listening to the quiet sounds of her unpacking, and wondered what kind of hell required a person to flee to a mountain retreat in January. Then again, anyone looking at him would wonder the same thing. He returned to his own room, sat on the bed, and stared at his phone. No messages from Sophie, no updates from Sarah. Just the wait of 2 weeks until a judge decided whether he was enough of a father to deserve his daughter. The afternoon bled into evening. Ryan heard Elena moving through the cabin occasionally, footsteps careful and deliberate, clearly working to honor the distance they'd silently agreed upon. He stayed in his room until hunger drove him out around 7, hoping she'd already eaten. The kitchen was empty. He made a sandwich, ate it standing at the counter, and retreated before she could emerge. The pattern felt sustainable. They were both adults, They could share space without actually sharing anything that mattered. Night fell hard in the mountains. Ryan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to wind in the pines and the settling sounds of the cabin. Sleep felt impossible, the way it had for months now. Most nights he managed 3 or 4 hours before the nightmares came. Amanda in the car, metal crushing, Sophie screaming for her mother. Or worse, Sophie older, calling Richard Pierce Dad, while Ryan faded to the edges of her memory like a photograph left too long in sunlight. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, the sound of retching jerked him fully awake. Footsteps stumbled across the cabin, a door slammed, and then silence except for ragged breathing that carried through the walls. Ryan sat up, uncertain. The sounds had come from Elena's side of the cabin. Part of him recognized this wasn't his problem, that they'd agreed on distance and privacy. But another part, the part that had spent 3 years learning to identify distress in all its forms because Sophie's grief had so many faces, understood what he was hearing. He moved quietly through the dark cabin, following instinct more than logic. Light showed under the bathroom door. The breathing had steadied, but still carried the irregular rhythm of someone fighting panic. His knuckles barely touched the door before her voice cut through, sharp despite the tremor. "I'm fine. Please go away." Ryan hesitated, hand hovering. He knew that tone, had used it himself often enough when people offered help he couldn't accept without admitting how broken he was. "Okay, there's ginger tea in the kitchen if you need it. For nausea." No response. He returned to his room, lay back down, and didn't sleep. 20 minutes later, he heard her door open, heard her footsteps move toward the kitchen. Water running, the electric kettle heating, the small sounds of someone trying to put themselves back together in the dark. He should stay in his room, should honor the boundaries, should remember that he'd come here to deal with his own disasters, not collect someone else's. Instead, he found himself pulling on sweatpants and a t-shirt, padding barefoot to the kitchen where Elena stood with her back to him, hands wrapped around a mug, shoulders rigid with the kind of tension that spoke of habitual defense. She turned when she heard him, and in the dim light from the stove, he saw her face without the armor. Younger than the polished professional from this afternoon. Exhausted. Haunted by something that lived behind her eyes and didn't let go. Nightmare? The word came out before he could stop it. She stiffened but didn't deny it. Something like that. You? I heard you. Thought I'd check. Elena's grip tightened on her mug. For a long moment, she just studied him, some calculation happening behind her exhaustion. Then she sighed, the sound carrying years of weight. I'm making tea. Do you want some? It was permission, carefully offered. Ryan nodded, retrieving a second mug from the cabinet. They moved around each other in the small kitchen with the exaggerated politeness of strangers learning each other's radius. When the tea was ready, they settled at opposite ends of the couch in the main room, leaving careful space between them, both staring at the cold fireplace rather than at each other. The silence stretched. Not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Just two people occupying the same darkness, bound by nothing except proximity and insomnia. Elena spoke first, her voice steadier now. How long have you been having them? The nightmares. Ryan calculated whether honesty mattered with a stranger he'd never see again after this week. 3 years. You? 7. The number hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. 7 years of nightmares suggested trauma that had calcified into permanent architecture, the kind that didn't heal so much as learn to coexist with daylight. Ryan took a slow sip of tea, the heat grounding him in the present moment. I used to be a journalist. Investigative reporting. Elena's confession emerged quiet, almost reluctant, as though she were testing whether speaking the words out loud would shatter something fragile. I was good at it. Really good. I exposed corruption, corporate malfeasance, The kind of stories that actually changed things. Then I got too close to the wrong story. Someone decided to send me a message about backing off. She paused, and Ryan heard the careful editing in what she didn't say. The details she was leaving out, the parts too raw to share with a stranger in the dark. They caught me in my hotel room after a conference. 3 men. They wanted to scare me, and they succeeded. Her hand trembled slightly on her mug. Ryan watched her force it steady through pure will. I survived. Physically, I was fine, but I couldn't do the work anymore. Couldn't investigate, couldn't ask dangerous questions, couldn't even be alone with sources. The panic attacks made it impossible. She let out a shaky breath. So I became a corporate crisis management consultant instead. I help companies contain their scandals rather than exposing them. It pays better, it's safer, and every day I hate myself a little more for taking the easy road. The honesty in her voice carried no self-pity, just exhaustion with her own compromises. Ryan recognized it because he felt the same exhaustion every time he calculated how to appear stable enough for family court while slowly dissolving inside. He set down his tea, clasped his hands between his knees. I have a daughter, Sophie. She's 6 years old, and she's the only good thing I've ever done with my life. The past tense in his phrasing made Elena glance at him, quick and assessing. Have, Ryan corrected himself, the distinction crucial. Still have. She's just not with me right now. He stood, moved to the window that overlooked the dark lake. Elena watched his reflection in the glass. Sophie's mother, Amanda, died 3 years ago. Car accident. 1 minute we were a family, the next I was a single father trying to figure out how to braid hair and make lunches and explain why Mommy wasn't coming home. His voice cracked. He pushed through it. I thought I was doing okay. Not great, but okay. Sophie was seeing a grief counselor. I was managing. We were surviving. What changed? Amanda's parents decided I wasn't enough. Ryan's reflection showed a bitter smile. The Pierces. Boston, old money, the kind of family that thinks wealth and status make them inherently better than everyone else. They never approved of me. Working class background, state school education, not the kind of pedigree they wanted for their daughter. But Amanda loved me, so they tolerated me. Until she died. Then I became the obstacle between them and their granddaughter. They filed for custody, claimed I was unfit, not abusive or neglectful. They couldn't prove that because it wasn't true. But they had lawyers, expert witnesses, unlimited resources. They painted me as emotionally unstable, financially insecure, unable to provide the kind of life Sophie deserved. Elena's expression tightened with recognition. She knew this story, had seen variations of it in her investigative work. Powerful people crushing those who stood in their way. Did they win? Partial custody. The judge gave them weekends and holidays. Said it was in Sophie's best interest to maintain her relationship with her maternal grandparents. Ryan turned from the window, his face hollowed by shadow and pain. But they're not trying to maintain a relationship. They're trying to erase me. Every visit, they tell Sophie how much better her life could be with them full-time. They buy her things I can't afford, take her places I can't go. They're slowly poisoning her against me, and I can't stop it because the court system favors their money and their lawyers over my truth. He moved back to the couch, sat heavily. I have another custody hearing in 2 weeks. The Pierces are pushing for primary custody. They might actually win this time. So I came here to try to hold myself together long enough to show up in court and not fall apart on the stand. The silence that followed carried the weight of their combined trauma filling the space between them. 2 people who'd been crushed by forces larger than themselves, trying to survive in the wreckage. Elena spoke quietly. I'm sorry for what you're going through, for what they're doing to you and Sophie. Yeah, well, we all have our damage, right? At least now we don't have to pretend otherwise.
No, I suppose we don't.
They finished their tea in silence, and when Ryan finally stood to return to his room, Elena spoke again.
Ryan.
He paused in the doorway.
For what it's worth, I think you're a good father. Anyone fighting this hard for their child against those kinds of odds, that's not someone who should lose.
The words hit harder than they should have, piercing through armor he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it wasn't skin. Tell that to the judge. But his voice came out softer than he intended, and when he looked back, Elena's eyes held something that might have been understanding, or might have been shared recognition that sometimes fighting wasn't enough. Morning came gray and cold. Ryan woke after 2 hours of fitful sleep to find the cabin quiet. He made coffee, stood at the kitchen window watching snow dust the pines, and wondered if Elena regretted last night's honesty. People rarely meant to be vulnerable. It usually just happened in the dark, when defenses were down and loneliness felt heavier than pride. He left a note on the counter. Went hiking. Back late afternoon. Coffee's fresh. And escaped before she could wake up and face the awkwardness of daylight confessions. The Northridge Trail was exactly what Sarah had promised when she'd recommended this place. Isolated, challenging enough to demand focus, beautiful in the harsh way winter mountains were beautiful. Ryan pushed himself harder than necessary, legs burning, lungs screaming in the thin air, trying to outrun thoughts that followed him regardless of altitude. Sophie with the Pierces right now, probably in their library, Catherine drilling vocabulary or etiquette or whatever refined skill she'd decided was essential today. Not playing in the snow or building forts or being 6 years old in the messy, joyful way children should be 6. He'd tried explaining this to the judge at the first hearing, that Sophie needed childhood, not cultivation, that loving her meant letting her be a kid, not molding her into some miniature aristocrat. But Richard Pierce's attorney had countered with statistics about early education and childhood development, expert testimony about the advantages of structure and opportunity, photographs of the Pierce mansion versus Ryan's 2-bedroom Ballard apartment. The judge had listened to both sides and split the difference. Sophie stayed primarily with Ryan on weekdays, went to the Pierces on weekends and holidays. A compromise that satisfied no one and slowly bled Ryan's relationship with his daughter through 1,000 small cuts. He returned to the cabin around 4, muscles aching, face numb from wind. Elena sat on the deck despite the cold, laptop open, fingers flying across the keys with the focused intensity of someone using work to avoid thinking. She glanced up when the deck door opened, offered a small nod, returned to her screen. Ryan showered, changed, and found himself in the kitchen starting dinner without consciously deciding to. Pasta, vegetables, nothing complicated. Enough for 2 because cooking for 1 still felt wrong after 3 years of automatically making portions for a family. Elena appeared in the doorway as he was draining the pasta, her expression carefully neutral. I made enough for 2, if you're hungry. She hesitated, calculating the same social math he was running. Sharing a meal meant acknowledging last night's conversation, meant accepting that they'd crossed from strangers into something else. But isolation was exhausting, and sometimes company, even awkward company, beat eating alone. That would be good, thank you. They ate at the dining table, conversation sparse but not uncomfortable. Elena asked about his hike, Ryan asked about her work. Simple exchanges that felt safer than the raw honesty of the previous night. Somewhere in the middle of dinner, Elena set down her fork. I usually avoid the main trails when I hike. Too many people trying to make conversation. But the Northridge route is pretty isolated this time of year, if you're interested in company tomorrow. The invitation was careful, leaving space for refusal. Ryan considered it. He'd come here for solitude, but solitude had just meant more time alone with thoughts that circled like vultures. I'd like that. There's a waterfall trail, 3 miles round trip. Well marked, beautiful views. Good starter hike if you haven't been out in a while. Elena's expression shifted, something uncertain crossing her face.
I used to hike. Before. I was training for a half marathon, spent weekends exploring trails around Seattle. But after what happened, I couldn't be in isolated places anymore. Too vulnerable. She met his eyes directly. Would it be easier if you weren't alone? I mean, if someone else was there who understood panic attacks? The question held no judgment, just practical problem solving. Ryan found himself nodding. Tomorrow works, if the weather holds. They finished dinner in more comfortable silence, and when Elena offered to do dishes, Ryan didn't argue. He retreated to the deck with coffee, watching the sun paint the mountains orange and gold as it set. Feeling something loosen in his chest that had been tight for so long, he'd forgotten it wasn't permanent.
The next 3 days fell into unexpected rhythm. Morning hikes on different trails, Ryan setting a moderate pace, pointing out landmarks. Afternoons separate, Ryan working remotely on a security audit, Elena buried in her laptop managing some crisis for clients he suspected she despised. Evenings cooking simple meals together, conversations that carefully avoided the deepest wounds while circling around them. Ryan learned that Elena had grown up in small-town Oregon, only child of teachers who believed integrity mattered more than money, that her first journalism award had made her cry because it meant her work actually changed policy, that Seattle felt lonely despite its crowds, or maybe because of them. Elena learned that Ryan had met Amanda in college, that falling in love with her had felt like discovering a language he didn't know he needed, that Sophie's birth had terrified him, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping another human alive, that Amanda's death had shattered his world. But Sophie's need had forced him to keep functioning when he wanted to stop. They didn't talk about the nightmares that still woke them most nights, or the trauma that had derailed Elena's career, or the custody battle that hung over Ryan like a guillotine. But those unspoken things lived in the silences between their words, acknowledged without being named. Sunday morning arrived, cold and clear. Ryan woke early, moved quietly to the kitchen, and began the ritual that had been sacred in his house since Sophie was 3. Amanda's pancake recipe, the one her grandmother had taught her, that Sophie claimed tasted like sunshine. He'd made these every Sunday for the past 3 years, even when Sophie was with the Pierces, because maintaining the tradition felt like keeping Amanda alive. Elena emerged from her room around 8, drawn by the smell of coffee and vanilla. She stopped in the kitchen doorway, watching him flip pancakes with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Sophie's favorite, Sunday morning tradition. Ryan's voice came out rougher than intended. Elena moved closer, studying the perfect golden circles. My mom used to make these. She called them Sunday pancakes too. Want some? I'd love some. They ate on the deck despite the cold, bundled in coats, plates balanced on their laps. The pancakes tasted like memory and grief, and the stubborn insistence on maintaining rituals even when the people who made them sacred were gone. Elena broke the comfortable silence. You're a good father, Ryan. I know I said that before, but I mean it. Anyone who makes pancakes every Sunday for a daughter who isn't even there? That's love. That's the kind of consistency that builds a person. Ryan stared at his plate, throat tight. The Pierces think consistency means private schools and piano lessons, and knowing which fork to use at fancy dinners. They think I'm teaching Sophie to settle for mediocrity. You're teaching her that love is action, that showing up matters, that traditions hold families together even when everything else falls apart. She paused, then added quietly, Sophie will remember these pancakes long after she's forgotten whatever the Pierces are trying to teach her about status and wealth. The words settled into Ryan's chest, warm and unexpected. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, and saw someone who understood loss and fighting and the exhaustion of maintaining dignity while slowly falling apart. Someone who'd been crushed by powerful people and survived, even if survival looked different than she'd planned. How do you do it? Keep going when everything feels impossible. Elena considered this, turning her coffee mug in her hands.
I don't know that I do. Most days I just survive, go through the motions, pretend I'm okay until pretending becomes habit. She met his eyes. But lately I've been wondering if survival is enough. If there's supposed to be something beyond just getting through each day without falling apart. Ryan understood that wondering, had felt it himself in the 3 years since Amanda died, in the slow erosion of hope under the weight of grief and custody battles and the suffocating sense that nothing he did would ever be enough. If you figure it out, let me know. Deal. They finished breakfast in silence, and when Elena offered to help clean up, Ryan let her. They moved around the small kitchen with the ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms, and it felt almost normal. Almost like having a partner again. Someone to share the small burdens of daily life. The week continued its pattern. More hikes, longer conversations, a slow thawing of the careful distance they'd started with. Ryan found himself talking about Sophie in ways he couldn't with other people. The grief counselor who'd helped her process Amanda's death. The dinosaur obsession that had consumed her for 6 months. The way she tried to adopt every stray cat in their neighborhood. Elena talked about journalism, the investigations that had mattered, the satisfaction of holding powerful people accountable. The bitterness in her voice when she described her current work, helping corporations hide their sins, carried 3 years of self-loathing and compromise. On Thursday evening, after dinner and too much wine, Elena asked the question Ryan had been avoiding. "Are you afraid of ending up alone?" Ryan stared into the fireplace they'd finally figured out how to light properly. "I used to think the worst thing that could happen was being alone. But I've been alone for 3 years now, and I survived it. What scares me more is the possibility that I'll stay so guarded, I'll never let anyone close again. That Sophie will grow up watching me exist instead of live, and she'll learn the wrong lessons about what life should be. What would the right lessons look like? That it's worth the risk. That opening yourself up to hurt is the only way to also open yourself up to joy. That love, real love, the kind that demands vulnerability, is worth fighting for, even when you're terrified." Elena swirled wine in her glass. "I haven't let anyone touch me since the attack. Not intimately, not casually, not at all. I can't even shake hands without my pulse spiking. The thought of actually being physically close to someone..." She shook her head. "I don't know if I'll ever get there again." Ryan turned to face her fully. "You don't have to decide that tonight. Maybe healing isn't linear. Maybe it's okay to just be where you are without rushing to some imagined finish line of fixed. Is that what you tell yourself?" "Every day. Doesn't always work, but it's better than the alternative." They sat in silence, the fire crackling, the night pressing against the windows. Ryan felt something shifting inside him, some glacial movement of ice beginning to thaw. He wasn't ready for intimacy or trust or anything beyond this tentative friendship. But maybe, possibly, he was ready to believe that being broken didn't mean being beyond repair. Elena's voice cut through his thoughts, quiet but deliberate. "Ryan, would it be okay if I sat next to you? Not anything beyond that. Just closer." He saw the courage it took for her to ask, understood what she was offering. Trust, carefully measured, extended despite every instinct screaming at her to protect herself. He shifted on the couch, making space. Elena moved slowly, hyper-aware of every inch between them closing. When she finally settled beside him, leaving maybe 6 inches of careful distance, Ryan could feel her entire nervous system screaming flight. But he didn't move toward her, didn't try to close the gap, just sat quietly as if sharing a couch was the most natural thing in the world. "Is this okay?" Her voice shook slightly. "Yeah, this is okay." They stayed like that for an hour, not touching but present, not speaking but communicating. The fire burned low, the wine glasses sat forgotten. Outside, wind moved through the pines, singing its ancient song of survival and endurance. When Elena finally stood to go to bed, she paused. "Thank you for understanding what that cost." Ryan looked up at her, this wounded woman who was slowly teaching him that broken didn't mean worthless. "Thank you for trusting me enough to try." In her room, alone in the dark, Elena touched the space on the couch where she'd sat, marveling that she'd allowed it, that it hadn't triggered panic, that maybe, impossibly, she might actually be healing. Ryan lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 3 years, fell asleep without nightmares. Morning came too fast. Ryan woke to silence, then to the sound of his phone vibrating against the nightstand. Sarah Mitchell's name on the screen, her text message destroying the fragile peace he'd built. Emergency hearing moved to Monday. Pierce attorneys filed motion based on new evidence. Need you in Seattle by Sunday latest for prep. Call me ASAP. Monday, 4 days from now. The continuation hearing that was supposed to be 2 weeks away, that he'd come to this mountain specifically to prepare for, had been accelerated. And new evidence meant the Pierces had found some new angle to attack him with, some fresh way to argue he was unfit. Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, phone in shaking hands, watching 3 years of careful survival collapse into 4 days of crisis. He needed to pack, drive back to Seattle, meet with Sarah, figure out what new evidence meant and how to counter it. He needed to leave this cabin and the unexpected peace he'd found here and return to the war he couldn't afford to lose. The door to Elena's room was closed when he emerged, showered and dressed, bag mostly packed. He left a note on the kitchen counter, hating how inadequate words felt. Emergency custody hearing moved up to Monday. Have to leave first thing. I'm sorry. Thank you for everything. R. His hand shook, writing his phone number below the message. Sharing contact information meant acknowledging this week had mattered, that whatever fragile connection they'd built was worth maintaining. But Elena deserved the choice to reach out or let this end here. He was loading his bag into the car when his phone buzzed. Unknown number, local Seattle area code. Ryan Matthews? Speaking. This is Linda from Evergreen Summit. I have a message for you from Ms. Morgan. She asked me to give you her phone number and said to tell you, it's okay. Call when you're ready. Ryan saved the number, stared at it, and felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed shut since Amanda died. Not hope, exactly, but possibility. The terrifying notion that maybe he didn't have to face the coming battle alone. He texted before he could overthink it. Emergency hearing Monday. Pierces have new evidence, don't know what. Terrified. The response came within seconds. I know people. Corporate attorneys aren't family law, but I could make calls. Help you find resources. Ryan's throat tightened. I can't afford that kind of help. Let me worry about affordability. Just think about it. He sat in his car, engine idling, staring at the cabin where he'd spent a week learning that vulnerability didn't automatically mean violation, where a stranger had become something more through the simple act of witnessing each other's pain without trying to fix it. His fingers moved before his brain could veto the decision. Why would you do that for me? The pause stretched long enough that he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, because the system is designed to favor wealth over justice, and I'm tired of watching that happen without fighting back. Because you're a good father being punished for not having the right pedigree. Because someone should level the playing field. Ryan read the message 3 times, something warm and unexpected spreading through his chest. I need to think about it. The hearing's in 4 days. I don't want to make things worse. Fair enough. The offer stands. He typed one more message, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. Thank you for this week. For everything. I came here thinking I was completely alone. You showed me that's not true. Her response made his eyes sting. You're not alone, Ryan. Whatever happens Monday, you're not alone.
He drove away from Evergreen Summit with the cabin shrinking in his rearview mirror, carrying the weight of an impossible custody battle and the unexpected gift of knowing, really knowing, that he didn't have to face it entirely by himself. The mountains disappeared behind him as the highway descended toward Seattle, but the peace he'd found in them remained, fragile and precious, tucked against his ribs like a secret he was learning to protect. Elena's apartment in downtown Seattle welcomed her back with the usual sterile indifference. Polished concrete floors, minimalist furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city without actually connecting her to it. She'd lived here 4 years, and it still felt like a hotel, a temporary stop on the way to somewhere that never materialized. She dropped her bag by the door, ignored the stack of mail that had accumulated during her week away, and stood at the window, watching Monday morning traffic crawl along the street below. Somewhere in that city, Ryan was preparing for a custody hearing that could destroy what remained of his life. She'd offered to help and meant it, but the practical logistics of that help remained unclear. Corporate crisis management didn't translate directly to family law, and her contacts in the legal world had narrowed significantly since she'd left investigative journalism. Her phone buzzed with the familiar cascade of work emergencies. Melissa, her assistant, had sent 12 messages over the weekend, each marked urgent. The pharmaceutical client, Meridian Pharma, was facing a Wall Street Journal expose about clinical trial irregularities. The executives wanted damage control, wanted Elena to make their problems disappear the way she'd made dozens of corporate scandals disappear over the past 7 years. The thought made her stomach turn. But this was what she did now. This was the compromise she'd accepted when fear had driven her out of real journalism and into the lucrative business of helping powerful people avoid consequences. She called Melissa back, listened to the panic in her assistant's voice as she described the situation. Trial data potentially manipulated. FDA violations. Investor lawsuits brewing. The executive team wanted a full strategy session this morning at 9. Elena glanced at the clock. 7:45. She had time to shower, dress in the armor of her professional persona, and become the person everyone expected her to be. The unshakable crisis consultant who never showed cracks, who solved impossible problems with strategic precision. The person she'd been at the mountain cabin. Vulnerable, honest, willing to sit 6 inches from a stranger on a couch. Felt like someone else entirely. Someone she'd imagined, rather than actually been. The executive conference room at Meridian Pharma smelled like expensive coffee and barely controlled panic. 8 men in suits, faces tight with a particular stress of people watching stock prices plummet in real time, waited for Elena to fix what they'd broken. She walked them through containment strategies with mechanical efficiency, acknowledged procedural inconsistencies while emphasizing commitment to patient safety, announce internal review, promise full cooperation with regulators, position this as isolated incident rather than systemic failure. The usual playbook for making corporate malfeasance look like unfortunate oversight. The CEO, whose compensation package exceeded what most families earned in a decade, leaned forward. Will it work? Elena met his eyes, saw the question beneath the question. Not will it protect patients or restore trust, but will it protect my money and my position? It'll minimize immediate damage. Long-term depends on what else the investigation uncovers. The general counsel spoke up, voice carrying implications that made Elena's skin crawl. Make sure nothing else gets uncovered. She'd navigated moments like this hundreds of times. The careful non-commitment that satisfied clients while protecting her own liability. But sitting in this room, listening to these men worry about their wealth while patients who'd trusted them faced health consequences, Elena felt something crack inside her. I'm a crisis management consultant, not a magician. If there are additional problems, they'll eventually surface. My recommendation is proactive disclosure rather than waiting for forced revelation. The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances,
They didn't want honesty. They wanted expensive cover-up dressed in compliance language. The meeting ended with assignments and deadlines, none of which addressed the actual ethical failures at the heart of the crisis.
Elena returned to her office feeling contaminated. The mountain air and morning pancakes replaced by recycled corporate atmosphere and moral compromise. Her phone showed 3 missed texts from Ryan. Hearing went badly. They had photographs. Call you later if that's okay. Need to talk to someone who understands. Thank you for offering to help. I'm trying to figure out what that actually means. Elena's stomach dropped. Photographs of what? She dialed Ryan's number before she could overthink it. He answered on the first ring, his voice carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd stopped sleeping. They had surveillance photos from the cabin. Us hiking together, sitting on the deck, cooking dinner. Their investigator must have been following me the whole week. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. What are they claiming? That I'm engaging in inappropriate relationships while I should be focused on Sophie. That I'm not prioritizing my daughter. That I'm the kind of father who goes to expensive mountain resorts to pick up women instead of fighting for custody. His voice cracked. The judge seemed sympathetic to their argument. She scheduled a continuation hearing for next Monday, 1 week from today. My attorney says we need character witnesses, documentation of my relationship with Sophie, evidence that I'm a stable parent despite grief and stress. But we only have 7 days to prepare, and the Pierces have unlimited resources to dig up more ammunition. Elena moved to her office window, watching Seattle traffic and calculating possibilities. What did your attorney say about representation? Does she have the resources to fight their legal team? Sarah Mitchell is good, really good, but she's outmatched. The Pierces have 3 attorneys from one of Boston's most prestigious firms. They can bury us in motions and depositions and discovery requests. Sarah's doing this mostly pro bono because I maxed out my savings on the first hearing. Ryan's breathing came ragged through the phone. I can't afford their kind of lawyers. I work in IT security, make decent money, but nothing compared to Pierce wealth. They could drag this out for years, bankrupt me with legal fees, and still have enough left over to buy another yacht. Elena's investigative instincts stirred, the skills she'd buried for 7 years waking up. Ryan, I want to help. More than just moral support. I know corporate attorneys who might consult on strategy. I can research the Pierce family finances, look for inconsistencies in their claims. I still remember how to build a case from scattered evidence. The silence stretched long enough that she thought he'd disconnected. Elena, these people are ruthless. If they find out you're helping me, they'll investigate you too. They'll dig up everything they can find to discredit you. Your assault, your career change, anything they can weaponize. Let them dig. The words came out harder than she intended. I have nothing to hide that I'm ashamed of, and I'm tired of watching powerful people crush everyone in their path while I help other powerful people do the same thing. She heard him breathe out, something releasing. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just send me everything you have. Court filings, financial documents, anything related to Sophie's trust fund or the Pierce family assets. I'll start digging tonight. After they disconnected, Elena sat at her desk staring at the pharmaceutical crisis files that suddenly felt obscene in their triviality. These executives worried about stock prices while Ryan fought to keep his daughter. The Pierces wielded wealth like a weapon while claiming to act in Sophie's best interest. She'd spent 7 years helping people like them hide their sins. Maybe it was time to remember how to expose them instead. The next 3 days blurred together. Elena attended Meridian Pharma meetings by day, appearing engaged while her mind worked on Ryan's case. By night, she dove into public records, cross-referencing property holdings, tax filings, business registrations. The Pierce family empire spread across multiple states, layered through trusts and corporations designed to obscure actual ownership. She found the trust fund on the 3rd night of searching. Sophie Matthews, beneficiary of a family trust established by Amanda Pierce Matthews shortly before her death. Current value listed at $2.3 million, managed by Richard and Catherine Pierce as trustees.
But the quarterly statements didn't match the initial valuations. Elena pulled up older records, traced the money backward, and felt her investigative instincts sharpen to a point. The trust had started at $3.6 million. Over 2 years, it had lost $1.3 million. Not through market fluctuations, but through deliberate transfers to accounts the Pierces controlled directly. She called Sarah Mitchell Wednesday morning, introduced herself as a friend of Ryan's with research experience. I found something in Sophie's trust fund documentation. The Pierces have depleted it by 35% in 2 years through what looks like complex estate planning maneuvers. If we can verify these transactions and prove they're mismanaging Sophie's assets while claiming financial superiority, it completely undermines their case. Sarah's voice sharpened with interest. Can you verify the transactions? Prove intent beyond normal portfolio management? Some of these records are protected. I can present what I have, but a good defense attorney will challenge the sourcing. Send me everything. Let me worry about legal admissibility. This is exactly the kind of evidence we need. Elena worked through Wednesday night and into Thursday morning, building documentation that showed the pattern clearly. The Pierces weren't just managing Sophie's inheritance. They were systematically transferring it into their own accounts while claiming Ryan lacked resources to provide for his daughter. She was deep in spreadsheet analysis when her assistant knocked Thursday afternoon. Elena, you have visitors. They say it's urgent. 2 people waited in her office lobby, man and woman in expensive suits, everything about them screaming corporate attorney. Elena's instincts flared immediately. Ms. Morgan, I'm David Fletcher, representing the Pierce family. This is my colleague, Jennifer Ross. We'd like a few minutes of your time. Elena kept her expression neutral. I'm in the middle of a client meeting. You'll need to schedule an appointment. Fletcher's smile carried no warmth. This won't take long. We understand you've been spending time with Ryan Matthews, that you're planning to provide testimony on his behalf in an ongoing custody matter. Her pulse spiked, but she held steady. I'm not discussing that with you. Jennifer Ross stepped forward, producing a folder from her briefcase. We simply wanted to make you aware of some facts you may not know about Mr. Matthews. His employment history shows significant instability, fired from 2 positions in the past 3 years. His financial records indicate substantial debt. His psychological evaluation, which we obtained legally through discovery, suggests unresolved grief and potential depression. Elena's jaw tightened. You're in the wrong building if you're looking for character assassination. Try the tabloids. Fletcher's voice sharpened. Ms. Morgan, we're not here to threaten you. But you should know that the Pierces are prepared to investigate everyone associated with Mr. Matthews' case. Your transition from journalism to corporate consulting was rather sudden 7 years ago, wasn't it? We understand there was an incident. The room temperature seemed to drop. Elena felt ice slide down her spine, fury overwhelming caution. If you're threatening to exploit my sexual assault for your custody case, I suggest you reconsider very carefully. I have friends in every major news outlet in this city. I know exactly how to make a story go viral. Wealthy family uses trauma survivor's assault to discredit custody testimony. That's front-page material. Fletcher and Ross exchanged glances, recalibrating their approach. We're simply encouraging you to reconsider your involvement. This is a family matter. Outsiders often don't understand the complexities. Elena moved to her office door, opened it. I understand that you're trying to intimidate me into silence. It won't work. Now get out of my building before I call security. They left without further argument, but Elena's hands shook as she closed the door. They'd found her. They'd researched her background. They knew about the assault, and they would absolutely weaponize it if she testified. Part of her wanted to withdraw, to protect herself from having her worst trauma dissected in a courtroom, but a larger part was simply angry. Furious that these people thought they could use her pain as ammunition, that they'd stoop to threatening a survivor to maintain control over their granddaughter. She texted Ryan immediately. Pierce attorneys just ambushed me at my office, threatened to use my assault in their case. You need to know what you're asking me to walk into. His response came within seconds. I'm calling you right now. She answered before the second ring. Tell me everything. Elena relayed the conversation, the implicit threats, the folder of information they'd brought about him. When she finished, Ryan's voice carried controlled fury.
I'm so sorry. God, Elena, I never should have asked for your help. I didn't think they'd go after you like this.
I'm not withdrawing my support, but you need to understand that they're going to make this ugly. They'll bring up my assault, probably use it to argue I'm emotionally compromised or biased against powerful men or whatever twisted logic serves their narrative. Then we fight back. We expose them for the manipulative predators they are. Ryan's voice broke. You don't understand what you're up against. These people have resources, connections, lawyers who specialize in destroying anyone who gets in their way. They'll bury us in litigation, make it too expensive and exhausting to continue. Elena surprised herself with her own certainty. Do you want me to back out? I would understand this isn't your fight. That's where you're wrong. This became my fight the moment they decided to use my trauma as a weapon. I'm not backing down.
The conversation shifted to strategy. Sarah Mitchell needed character witnesses, needed documentation of Ryan's relationship with Sophie, needed evidence countering the instability narrative. Elena had research skills and connections. Ryan had 3 years of parenting documented in school records, pediatrician visits, the daily mundane proof that he'd shown up for his daughter every single day. They talked for an hour, building a defense from fragments. When they finally disconnected, Elena felt energized in a way she hadn't experienced in 7 years. This was investigative work that mattered. This was using her skills for justice instead of cover-up. Her managing partner called Friday morning, voice tight with barely controlled anger. Meridian Pharma is threatening to pull their entire account. They claim you've been distracted, unresponsive, not providing the level of service they're paying for. Elena had known this was coming. Her billable hours had plummeted this week. Her attention had been elsewhere. The executives could sense her disgust with their priorities. I've been dealing with a personal situation. I can get back on track next week. It's more than just this week. Your colleagues have reported you seem checked out during strategy sessions. Your performance reviews show declining engagement. Gerald paused, and she heard genuine concern beneath the professional disappointment. Elena, you're one of our top consultants. What's going on? She could offer excuses, could promise to recommit, could do whatever necessary to preserve her position and her 6-figure salary. Instead, she heard herself say the words she'd been avoiding for months. I'm resigning, effective immediately. I'll finish the Meridian transition, but that's my last project. Silence on the other end. Then, is this about money? Because we can discuss compensation. It's not about money. I'm going back to journalism. I can't help corporations hide their sins anymore. After she hung up, Elena sat very still in her office, processing what she'd just done. She'd quit her job, walked away from financial security with no backup plan, nothing but a half-formed conviction that she needed to reclaim the person she'd been before fear had rewritten her story. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Can I see you? I need to see you. Not about the case, just, I need to see you. She should say no, should maintain professional boundaries, should recognize that her involvement in his custody battle was already complicated enough without adding emotional entanglement. But she'd just destroyed her career for the principle of fighting back against powerful abusers. What was one more boundary crossed in service of something real? Give me your address. I'll come to you. Ryan's apartment in Ballard occupied the second floor of a building that had seen better decades. Worn carpet, scuffed walls, the kind of place families lived when they prioritized proximity to good schools over aesthetic appeal. Elena climbed the stairs, knocked on Unit 2B, and found Ryan in the doorway, looking hollowed out by exhaustion. His living room told the story of single parenthood through scattered evidence. Sophie's drawings covered the refrigerator. Stuffed animals occupied one corner of the couch. children's books stacked carefully on a shelf next to IT security manuals. Ryan gestured her inside, and she saw the supervised visitation report lying on the kitchen counter. Official letterhead, clinical language describing today's interaction between father and daughter, observed and documented by a court-appointed monitor. They sent a lawyer to watch me with Sophie. Took notes on everything. How I talked to her, what activities we did, whether she seemed comfortable or anxious. His voice carried a rage so carefully controlled, it vibrated in the air. Sophie asked me why the strange lady was writing everything down, why she couldn't sit on my lap the way she normally does. They're teaching my 6-year-old daughter that her father is dangerous. Elena moved closer, instinct overriding hesitation. She took his hand, a gesture that would have been impossible a week ago, that still made her nervous system scream warnings. But Ryan's fingers closed around hers carefully, his touch warm and steady, despite everything falling apart. I'm losing her. Not just the legal custody. Maybe we'll win that, maybe we won't. But I'm losing who she is. Every visit with the Pierces, she comes back a little more theirs, a little less mine. She talks about their yacht, their country club, their important friends. She's starting to look at me with pity, like I'm someone to be managed rather than loved. Elena squeezed his hand. She's 6. She doesn't understand manipulation yet. She sees expensive gifts and exciting experiences, not the agenda behind them. How do I compete with that? I'm a mid-level IT security analyst. I can't take her to Europe for the summer, or buy her a pony, or introduce her to celebrities. All I have is love, and apparently that's not enough. The defeat in his voice made Elena's chest ache. She'd seen this pattern in her investigative work. Powerful people crushing those who stood in their way, using resources as weapons while claiming moral superiority. Listen to me. Love is everything. Material things are temporary, impressive in the moment, but ultimately meaningless. What you're giving Sophie, presence, attention, unconditional acceptance, that's what builds a person. The Pierces are offering her a gilded cage. You're offering her freedom to be herself. Ryan looked at her with such raw vulnerability that she felt something crack open inside her own carefully guarded chest. What if she doesn't figure that out until it's too late? What if the Pierces win and she grows up thinking wealth and status matter more than connection? Then you'll still have been the one who showed her genuine love. That doesn't disappear just because other people are louder or flashier. It roots deep. They stood in his small kitchen, hands linked, two people who'd survived separate hells, discovering that maybe connection didn't have to be terrifying. Maybe trust was worth the risk of being hurt again. Ryan's voice came quiet. I'm scared. Of losing Sophie, yes, but also of what I'm becoming in this fight. I'm so angry all the time, so bitter. I don't recognize myself anymore. Elena understood that fear intimately, had felt it herself in the years after the assault, watching herself calcify into someone harder and more defended than she'd ever intended to become. You're in survival mode. That's not who you are permanently. It's what you need to be right now. Is that what happened to you after the assault? Survival mode that became permanent? The question was gentle but direct. Elena appreciated the honesty. Yeah, I survived the immediate crisis. Then I just kept surviving. Forgot that there was supposed to be something beyond survival. But being at the cabin with you, and now helping with Sophie's case, I'm remembering that fighting for something that matters feels different than just existing. Ryan studied her face, seeing her clearly in a way that should have felt invasive, but somehow didn't. You quit your corporate job. It wasn't a question. She nodded. This morning. No backup plan. Just a conviction that I can't keep helping powerful people avoid consequences while watching you fight for your daughter. That's incredibly brave and possibly insane. Probably both.
Ryan's other hand came up, fingers tracing the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness.
Elena's first instinct was to pull away, to protect herself from the vulnerability of being touched. But she forced herself to breathe through the fear, to allow the contact, to trust that he wouldn't hurt her.
I should probably go. It's late.
But neither of them moved. They stood in his kitchen, touching carefully, both terrified and both unwilling to return to the loneliness waiting in their separate spaces. Ryan walked her to her car, the Seattle drizzle turning to proper rain. Elena's hand was on the door handle when she turned back, momentum carrying her forward before fear could veto the impulse. She rose on her toes, pressed a brief kiss to his cheek. Chaste, almost sisterly, but it represented a monumental shift in her ability to initiate physical contact. Ryan's eyes widened, understanding the significance even without knowing the full extent of her trauma.
Thank you for all of this. For fighting when you had no obligation to.
Elena felt rain on her face, tears mixing with weather.
Where else would I be?
She drove back to her apartment with her heart pounding, her skin still tingling from the brief contact.
She'd kissed someone voluntarily for the first time in 7 years.
The panic attack she'd expected didn't come.
Instead, she felt something like hope, fragile and terrifying, but real.
Saturday brought Elena's first meeting with the senior partner whose network Ryan would repair. Thomas Whitmore occupied a corner office in one of downtown Seattle's more prestigious buildings, and his expression when Elena explained the favor she needed suggested he was reconsidering their professional relationship. "You want me to provide pro bono consultation on a custody case? In exchange for IT support from someone I've never met?" Elena held his gaze.
"Ryan Matthews is one of the best security analysts in the region. Your network has been crashing for 3 weeks.
Your usual contractor quoted you $15,000 to diagnose and repair the issue. Ryan will do it in an afternoon, and all he asks is that you review his custody filings and provide strategic advice." Whitmore's skepticism was palpable, but desperation won out. His firm had lost 2 major presentations to network failures. He needed the problem solved. Ryan arrived at noon, carrying a laptop bag and the particular confidence of someone operating in their area of expertise. Watching him work was like watching a different person emerge. The grief-hollowed father disappeared, replaced by a professional who spoke in precise technical language and moved through system diagnostics with practiced efficiency. He opened a terminal window, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Your network's bottlenecked. See this?" He pointed to streaming data Elena couldn't begin to interpret. "Average latency is 340 milliseconds, packet loss at 12%. That's catastrophic for business operations. Root cause appears to be your firewall creating packet collisions with your new security protocols." Whitmore leaned closer, following Ryan's explanation with increasing respect. "I'll reroute traffic through your secondary gateway, update firmware to version 8.2 to eliminate the conflict, implement quality of service protocols to prioritize mission-critical traffic over general use, and configure load balancing across both servers. Should drop your latency to under 50 milliseconds and eliminate packet loss entirely." "How long will that take?" 3 hours, maybe 4. Ryan worked methodically, explaining each step to Whitmore in language that demonstrated not just technical skill, but the ability to communicate complex concepts clearly. Elena watched him transform from struggling single father to competent professional, saw the way his shoulders straightened when he was solving problems within his control. By 4 o'clock, the network ran flawlessly. Whitmore tested it himself, pulling up presentations and files that had been inaccessible for weeks, his expression shifting from skepticism to genuine appreciation. "That would have cost me $15,000 from my usual contractor. You did it in 4 hours." Ryan packed his equipment. "I do good work. That's all I've ever asked anyone to see, that I'm competent, that I show up, that I deliver what I promise." Whitmore met Elena's eyes, understanding passing between them. "Send me the custody filings. I'll review them and call your attorney Monday morning with strategic recommendations.
No charge. Outside, rain had given way to watery sunlight. Ryan and Elena stood by her car, the professional victory settling into something more personal. You proved something important today. That you have value beyond what the Pierces want to acknowledge. That your skills matter. Ryan's smile carried exhaustion and relief in equal measure. I just needed someone to see it, to give me the chance to show what I can actually do. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Mitchell. She read it, felt her stomach drop, showed the scream to Ryan. Pierce attorneys reached out. They want to meet tomorrow. Settlement discussion. The hope that had flickered in Ryan's eyes died instantly. They want me to surrender, to accept reduced custody without fighting back. You don't have to take any deal, but Sarah wants us to hear what they're offering. Ryan stared at the message, jaw working. Monday's hearing is 3 days away. If we reject their settlement, we go to trial with everything we have and hope it's enough. If we accept, I guarantee I keep some access to Sophie, but give up any chance of expanding custody. Elena watched him calculate impossible odds, saw the fear and courage warring in his expression. What does your gut say? My gut says they're offering this because they know we found something that scares them. The trust fund evidence, maybe. They want to settle before it becomes public record. His eyes met hers, seeking confirmation or denial or some wisdom she didn't possess. Fight. Make them prove their case in open court. Expose what they've done to Sophie's inheritance. Show the judge who they really are. Ryan nodded slowly, decision crystallizing. Then we fight. The weekend dissolved into frantic preparation. Sarah Mitchell reviewed the trust fund documentation, built legal framework for presenting it. Elena verified transactions, created visual aids showing the depletion pattern. Ryan compiled 3 years of Sophie's school records, pediatrician visits, every scrap of evidence proving he'd been present and engaged in his daughter's life. Sunday night found them in Ryan's apartment, files spread across every surface, running through testimony one more time. Elena coached him on how to stay composed under cross-examination, how to answer directly without getting defensive. They're going to paint you as unstable, financially insecure, emotionally compromised. You need to stay calm, stick to facts, let your record speak for itself. Ryan's hands shook slightly as he reviewed his notes. What if it's not enough? What if the judge sides with their money and their connections despite everything we've presented? Elena moved to sit beside him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. Then we appeal. We keep fighting. We don't give up. I'm terrified. I know. But you're not fighting alone anymore. His arms came around her carefully, tentatively, giving her time to retreat if needed. Elena let herself be held, let herself rest against his solidity despite every instinct screaming danger. Her nervous system was learning, slowly, painfully, that this man was safe, that vulnerability didn't automatically mean violation. I'm in love with you. Ryan's words came out rough, unexpected, honest in the way people are honest when they've run out of strength for pretense. I know it's too soon. I know the timing is terrible. I know I have nothing to offer you except complications and emotional baggage. But I'm completely in love with you, and I can't pretend otherwise when tomorrow might change everything. Elena pulled back enough to look at him directly, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'm in love with you too. Since the mountain. Since you made pancakes and talked about Sophie and didn't try to fix my trauma. Since you showed me that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. They kissed then, tentative at first, then deeper, 7 years of Elena's fear dissolving in the certainty that this was right, that this was safe, that she was allowed to want this. Ryan's hands stayed gentle, mindful of her boundaries, never pushing for more than she offered. When they finally separated, both breathing unevenly, the Seattle night pressed against the windows, and the custody hearing waited like a guillotine blade. Stay tonight. Just sleep. I don't want to be alone before tomorrow. Elena nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. They fell asleep, tangled together on Ryan's couch, and for the first time since the assault, she spent the night beside another person without nightmares. Morning came gray and merciless. They dressed in careful silence, Ryan in his only suit, Elena in the Navy outfit she'd worn to testify in dozens of corporate trials. Sarah met them at the King County Courthouse, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes carrying concern. The Pierces arrived with their full legal team. They're making a show of force, but we have strong evidence. Just stay composed, answer honestly, and let me handle the legal maneuvering.
The courtroom was smaller than Elena expected, more like a conference room than the grand chambers she'd imagined. Richard and Catherine Pierce sat at the opposing table, flanked by 3 attorneys in expensive suits. Catherine's expression held the particular disdain of someone forced to acknowledge lesser beings. Richard looked through Ryan as though he were furniture. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, and everyone stood. She was younger than Elena expected, maybe late 40s, with sharp eyes that suggested she'd heard every manipulation tactic and wasn't easily fooled. Sarah presented the trust fund evidence methodically, walking Judge Morrison through the timeline of transfers, the pattern of depletion, the concerning reduction in Sophie's inheritance, while the Pierces claimed financial superiority over Ryan. Your Honor, the documentation clearly shows that over 2 years, Sophie Matthews' trust fund has been reduced from $3.6 million to $2.3 million. Not through market fluctuations or normal portfolio management, but through deliberate transfers to accounts controlled by the Pierces. While claiming Mr. Matthews lacks resources to provide for his daughter, they have systematically depleted her actual inheritance. The Pierce attorney, a woman named Victoria Hartman whose reputation preceded her, objected immediately. Your Honor, the trust fund management represents sophisticated estate planning designed to minimize tax liability and preserve long-term capital. Ms. Mitchell's characterization distorts normal financial practices. Judge Morrison studied the documents, her expression unreadable. I'll allow the evidence. Continue, Ms. Mitchell. Sarah called Ryan to the stand. He took the oath, sat down, and faced the courtroom with visible effort to appear composed. The direct examination covered familiar ground. How long had he been Sophie's primary caregiver? What was his daily routine with her? How did he balance work and parenting? Ryan answered each question directly, his voice steady despite the tremor Elena could see in his hands. Then came Victoria Hartman's cross-examination, and the gloves came off. Mr. Matthews, you testified that you work in IT security. How many positions have you held in the past 3 years? 3. Why the frequent changes? 2 were contract positions that ended when projects completed. The 3rd was a layoff during company restructuring. But you've had employment gaps totaling 7 months in 3 years, correct? Correct. IT security is project-based. Gaps between contracts are normal. Hartman produced a document. Your financial disclosure shows credit card debt exceeding $30,000. Student loans totaling $60,000. Is that accurate? Ryan's jaw tightened. Yes. How do you plan to provide for Sophie's future with that level of financial burden? The same way millions of parents provide for their children, by working, budgeting, prioritizing her needs over my wants. Debt doesn't make someone a bad parent. But wouldn't Sophie benefit from the financial security my clients can provide? Private schools, tutors, opportunities you simply cannot afford? She'd benefit from having her father, from knowing that love doesn't have a price tag, from learning that a person's worth isn't measured in bank statements. The answer hung in the courtroom, simple and devastating. Elena saw Judge Morrison's expression flicker, approval, maybe, or at least acknowledgement. Hartman shifted tactics. Mr. Matthews, you attended a mountain retreat in early January, correct? Yes. During that week, you spent considerable time with Mrs. Elena Morgan, who's present in this courtroom today. We were assigned to share a cabin due to a plumbing emergency. Yes, we spent time together. Would you characterize your relationship as romantic? Sarah objected immediately,
but Judge Morrison allowed the question. We became friends. She supported me during a difficult time. Hartman produced the surveillance photographs, and Elena's stomach turned. Images of her and Ryan hiking, sitting on the cabin deck, cooking dinner together. Innocent moments twisted into evidence of irresponsibility. These photographs show considerable intimacy for people who claim to be just friends. Wouldn't you agree that spending a week at an expensive resort, engaging in romantic relationship, while your daughter was with my clients, suggests misplaced priorities? Ryan's voice came hard. I spent 1 week trying to hold myself together before a custody hearing. I made friends with someone who understood grief and loss.
There was nothing inappropriate about our interactions. The only thing those photographs prove is that your clients hired investigators to follow me, which says more about their priorities than mine. The cross-examination continued, brutal and precise, but Ryan held steady. When he finally stepped down, Elena saw exhaustion in every line of his body, but also a kind of dignity. He told his truth without begging or apologizing. Judge Morrison called a brief recess. In the hallway, Ryan leaned against the wall, eyes closed. I don't know if that was enough. Sarah's expression carried careful neutrality. You did well. You stayed composed, answered honestly. Now we wait for her ruling. When they reconvened, Judge Morrison had that particular stillness of someone who'd made a difficult decision. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented. This case presents challenging questions about what constitutes a child's best interests when multiple parties offer different but valid forms of care and support. She paused, and Elena felt Ryan tense beside her. The Pierces have argued they can provide superior material resources and educational opportunities. This argument has merit. Their wealth and connections do create possibilities unavailable to Mr. Matthews. Ryan's hand found Elena's under the table, gripping hard enough to hurt. However, this court is troubled by evidence suggesting the Pierces have systematically depleted Sophie Matthews' trust fund while simultaneously arguing superior financial fitness. The documentation presented raises serious questions about asset management and potential misappropriation of funds held for the child's benefit. Catherine Pierce's face went rigid. Richard leaned to whisper urgently to his attorney. Furthermore, the court notes that material advantages, while important, are not the sole measure of parental fitness. Mr. Matthews has demonstrated consistent, loving involvement in his daughter's life. His financial challenges are common among single parents and do not indicate inadequacy. His decision to seek support at a wellness retreat shows self-awareness, not instability. Judge Morrison's gaze moved to the Pierce table. The court also finds troubling the Pierces' apparent strategy of using their resources to systematically undermine Mr. Matthews, rather than support Sophie's relationship with her father. This pattern suggests motivation beyond the child's welfare. She delivered the ruling with judicial precision. Therefore, this court rules as follows. Primary physical custody remains with Ryan Matthews. Sophie will reside with her father during weekdays and attend school in his district. The Pierces' visitation is modified to 3 weekends per month and alternating major holidays. Elena felt Ryan's confusion. 3 weekends was more than the previous 2. This was worse, not better. Additionally, the court orders independent oversight of Sophie Matthews' trust fund with quarterly reporting to ensure proper management. Any further reduction in the trust's value without clear justification will result in removal of the Pierces as trustees. Judge Morrison's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Mr. Matthews, you have the opportunity to be the father you've demonstrated yourself to be. Continue showing up for your daughter with the consistency and love you've shown to date. Mrs. Pierce, Mr. Pierce, you have the opportunity to be positive influences in your granddaughter's life. I encourage you to use your resources to support Sophie's relationship with her father, rather than compete with it. The gavel came down, and it was over. Ryan sat motionless, processing the mixed victory. He'd kept primary custody, kept Sophie living with him during the week, but he'd lost a weekend per month. The Pierces had gained more access, not less. Outside the courthouse, rain fell in sheets. Ryan stood on the steps, face turned up to the sky, and Elena saw him trying to find gratitude in the partial win. You kept her. Sophie stays with you. Sarah nodded agreement. It could have been much worse. The judge could have granted them primary custody. Instead, she validated your parenting while putting financial oversight in place. This is a win, Ryan. Maybe not the complete victory we wanted, but definitely a win. Ryan pulled out his phone, dialed Sophie's number. The Pierces had her today, their weekend. His daughter answered on the second ring. Daddy, are we safe now? His voice broke. Yes, baby. We're safe. You're staying with Daddy during the week. Every week. No more questions about it. Can Mr. Hoppers live at your place full time now instead of just visiting? Ryan laughed through tears. Yes, sweetheart. Mr. Hoppers can live at home now. After he disconnected, he turned to Elena, and she saw everything in his face. Relief and disappointment and exhaustion and love. I don't know whether to celebrate or cry. Both. You're allowed both. They stood in the rain while Seattle moved around them, two people who'd fought impossible odds and survived, if not unscathed, then at least still standing. The war wasn't over, the Pierces could appeal, could find new ways to challenge custody, but for now, Ryan had won the right to be Sophie's father, and that was everything. 3 months after the custody ruling, Ryan stood in his apartment kitchen, watching Sophie push scrambled eggs around her plate, her face carrying the particular distance that followed Pierce weekends. She'd returned Sunday evening with new vocabulary about sailing regattas and summer estates, stories about famous people Grandpa Richard knew, observations about how their Ballard apartment didn't have a pool or a library or staff who brought you things. He'd learned to recognize the poison even when Sophie didn't understand she was delivering it. The Pierces weren't overtly undermining him anymore. Judge Morrison's warning had achieved that much. But they were showing Sophie a world of privilege and possibility, then sending her back to his 2-bedroom apartment where dinner came from a grocery store instead of a private chef. Daddy, why don't we have a pool? The question emerged innocent, genuinely curious. Sophie wasn't comparing. She was 6 years old, trying to understand why different places had different things. Ryan sat across from her, choosing words carefully. Different families have different things, sweetheart. Some families have pools. We have the park 3 blocks away with the really good swings. Some families have big libraries. We have the public library where Ms. Patterson lets you check out as many books as you want. Sophie considered this, working through 6-year-old logic. Grandma Catherine says having nice things and love are both important. There it was, subtle but unmistakable. The suggestion that Ryan's love came without the nice things that supposedly mattered. Love is the most important thing. Everything else is just stuff. Stuff doesn't make you happy. People who care about you make you happy. Sophie nodded, but Ryan saw uncertainty in her eyes. She was too young to articulate what the Pierces were teaching her, but the lessons were taking root regardless. The slow erosion of his credibility through 1,000 small comparisons. Elena arrived for dinner 20 minutes later, and Sophie's face transformed. Over the past month, Elena had become a steady presence, not living with them yet, but there most evenings, present for weekend activities, slowly integrating into their routine. Elena, I learned a new song on piano. Do you want to hear it? Sophie dragged Elena to the small keyboard Ryan had bought secondhand, played through a simple melody with the concentrated determination of a child working hard to impress. Elena listened with genuine attention, then applauded. That was beautiful. How long have you been practicing? Grandma Catherine's piano teacher comes twice a week when I'm there. She says I have natural talent. Ryan watched Elena navigate the minefield of acknowledging Sophie's achievement without validating the Pierce narrative. She was getting better at it, finding ways to celebrate Sophie
while maintaining boundaries. You're working really hard. Your dad must be proud. Sophie glanced at Ryan, seeking confirmation. He nodded, throat tight with gratitude that Elena understood what mattered, not dismissing the Pierce influence, but centering his role as Sophie's father. They ate dinner together, the three of them around Ryan's small table. Sophie chattered about school and friends and a camping trip her class was planning. Normal 6-year-old preoccupations that had nothing to do with wealth or status. In these moments, Ryan could almost forget the custody battle and the Pierce influence and the constant fear that he was losing ground. After Sophie went to bed, Ryan and Elena cleaned the kitchen in comfortable silence. She'd learned where he kept things, moved through his space with the ease of someone who belonged there. She's struggling with the two worlds. Elena's observation was gentle but accurate. I know. The Pierces are complying with the ruling, but they're still trying to make her choose. They just do it through exposure instead of explicit pressure now.
What does Sarah say? That unless they're actively alienating her from me, there's nothing the court will do. Showing her their lifestyle isn't illegal, it's just effective. Ryan leaned against the counter, exhaustion settling into his bones. Some days I wonder if I'm being selfish. If Sophie would genuinely be better off with their resources and opportunities, and I'm holding her back because I can't stand to lose her. Elena moved closer, her hand finding his. You're not holding her back. You're giving her something they can't buy. A father who shows up every single day, who makes pancakes on Sunday and helps with homework and knows her favorite bedtime story. That matters more than any amount of money. I hope you're right. I am right. And Sophie knows it too, even if she's confused right now. 6-year-olds aren't great at articulating what they feel, but she lights up when she sees you. That's not something the Pierces can manufacture. Ryan pulled Elena against him, breathing in her presence. 4 months since the mountain cabin, 3 months since the custody ruling, and she'd become essential to his survival. Not because she fixed anything, but because she stood beside him in the wreckage and made it feel less lonely. I love you. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know. You saved me. Elena pulled back enough to look at him directly, her dark eyes serious. I didn't save you. We're saving each other. The difference mattered. Ryan understood that Elena needed to be more than his rescuer, needed their relationship to be partnership rather than charity. He was learning that healing happened in both directions, that two damaged people could build something stronger together than either could construct alone. Week 4 brought an unexpected complication. Ryan picked up Sophie from school Friday afternoon to find her subdued, clutching a permission slip for the camping trip with unusual intensity. What's wrong, baby? Sophie's voice came small. The camping trip costs $60. Plus, we need sleeping bags and hiking boots and special clothes. I know that's a lot of money. Ryan's chest tightened. $60 wasn't impossible, but it required juggling other expenses, and the equipment would cost more. He could manage it, but Sophie had learned to recognize financial stress even when he tried to hide it. We'll make it work. You're going on that camping trip. Grandma Catherine said if you can't afford it, they could pay. She said it's okay to ask for help when you need it. The offer was reasonable on its surface, generous even, but Ryan heard the subtext, the implication that he couldn't provide, that Sophie should rely on Pierce wealth to access normal childhood experiences. Tell Grandma Catherine thank you, but Daddy's got this covered. You're my daughter, I take care of you. He bought the equipment that weekend, putting it on a credit card he'd been trying to pay down. Worth it to prove he could handle his daughter's needs without Pierce intervention. Worth it to show Sophie that her father didn't need their charity. Elena met him for coffee Monday morning before work, saw the tension in his shoulders. The camping trip? $60 for the trip, another $120 for gear.
The Pierces offered to cover it. I said no. Because accepting help from them comes with strings. Ryan nodded. Every time they provide something I can't, they prove their point. That Sophie needs them. That I'm insufficient. Elena stirred her coffee, thinking, what if it wasn't them? What if someone else helped? I don't need charity, Elena. It's not charity, it's partnership. She pulled out her phone, opened her banking app, showed him the screen. I have savings, more than I need. Let me cover the camping gear.
Not as charity, but as someone who cares about Sophie and wants her to have normal childhood experiences without financial stress crushing you. Ryan wanted to refuse. Pride demanded he handle this himself, prove he didn't need help from anyone. But he was learning that pride and stubbornness weren't the same as strength, that accepting support from people who genuinely cared was different than depending on people who wielded generosity as a weapon. I'll pay you back. No, you won't. This is me choosing to invest in Sophie's happiness because I love her father, and I'm starting to love her too. The simplicity of it, the lack of conditions or implications, made Ryan's eyes sting. This was what partnership looked like. Not keeping score, not maintaining leverage, just showing up and helping because you could. Month 5 arrived with spring and unexpected professional vindication for Elena. Mark Stevens from the Seattle Times called on a Tuesday morning, his voice carrying the particular energy of an editor who'd found something good. The labor violations piece you pitched? I want it. Full investigative feature, 2 weeks to research and write. If it's as strong as I think it'll be, we'll talk about a permanent position. Elena had been freelancing since leaving corporate consulting, taking small assignments while rebuilding her investigative muscles. This was different. This was real journalism, the kind that mattered. She spent 2 weeks interviewing warehouse workers, documenting safety violations, tracing the corporate structure that allowed a prominent Seattle tech company to exploit labor while maintaining a progressive public image. The work felt like coming home, like rediscovering a language she'd thought she'd forgotten. The piece published on a Thursday morning. By noon, it had gone viral. NPR requested an interview. CNN picked it up for their evening segment. The company's stock dropped 4%, and their CEO issued a statement promising immediate reforms. Ryan read the article 3 times, watching Elena's byline with something close to awe. This is incredible. You destroyed them. Elena felt something unlock in her chest that had been sealed for 7 years. This was who she was supposed to be, not helping corporations hide their sins, but exposing them, not compromising her values for safety, but fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. It feels right, like I've been holding my breath for 7 years and finally remembered how to exhale. Mark called that evening with a formal offer. Staff investigative reporter, full benefits, salary that wouldn't match her corporate consulting income but would cover her expenses with room to spare. Elena accepted before he'd finished outlining the terms. She was celebrating with Ryan and Sophie, pizza and ice cream, Sophie's choice, when her phone rang again. Unknown number, Boston area code. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Morgan, this is Victoria Hartman. We met at the custody hearing. The Pierce attorney. Elena's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice neutral. I remember. I'm calling to inform you that my clients are filing an appeal. The motion will be served tomorrow. They're citing new evidence of parental unfitness, specifically Mr. Matthews' involvement in an unstable romantic relationship that exposes Sophie to inappropriate influence. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. There's nothing inappropriate about our relationship. That will be for the court to decide. I wanted to give you advance notice as a professional courtesy. The hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. After she disconnected, Elena sat very still, processing. Ryan was watching her, reading disaster in her expression. What happened?
They're appealing, claiming our relationship proves you're unfit. The pizza sat forgotten. Sophie, oblivious to the adult tension, chattered about her ice cream flavors. Ryan's face had gone pale, the hard-won stability of the past few months crumbling. I thought this was over. Sarah warned us they might try again. Let me call her. Sarah Mitchell's assessment was pragmatic, but not comforting. It's a weak motion. Judge Morrison already ruled on this. They're claiming your relationship with Elena constitutes a significant change in circumstances, but that's a stretch. Still, we have to take it seriously. Can you both be available for a hearing in 3 weeks? We'll be there. After hanging up, Elena found Ryan on the apartment balcony, staring at Seattle traffic below. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, felt the tension vibrating through his shoulders. We beat them once.
We'll beat them again. What if we don't? What if this time they win? What if I lose Sophie because I fell in love with you? Elena turned him to face her, hands on his face, forcing him to see her certainty. Then we'll appeal again. And again. As many times as it takes. But Ryan, you need to hear this. I'm not going anywhere. They can threaten and file motions and drag us through legal hell, but I'm staying. You're stuck with me. His kiss tasted like desperation and gratitude and fear. They stood on his balcony while the city moved below them, 2 people who'd survived worse than this, who would survive this too, because giving up wasn't an option. The 3 weeks before the appeal hearing passed in controlled chaos. Elena continued her journalism work, breaking another story about corporate tax avoidance that cemented her reputation as someone who'd returned to investigative reporting with a vengeance. Ryan maintained his routine with Sophie, documented every interaction, built evidence of stability. They spent more time together, testing whether the Pierce accusation of inappropriate influence had any merit. Sophie seemed fine. Happy, even, with Elena's increased presence. She'd started calling her Elena without hesitation, asking her questions about journalism and college and whether she'd ever been camping. The night before the appeal hearing, Ryan made Sophie's favorite dinner, macaroni and cheese from scratch, the recipe Amanda had perfected over years of trial and error. Elena watched him cook with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, noticed the care he took with every step. Amanda taught me this recipe when Sophie was 2. She said good comfort food was essential parenting infrastructure. Elena moved beside him at the stove, learning the rhythm of his movements. Show me how. I want to be able to make this for Sophie when you're not here. The domesticity of it, teaching each other recipes, building shared knowledge, felt significant in ways Elena couldn't fully articulate. This was what families did. They passed down traditions, created new ones, built structures of care that lasted beyond any one person. After Sophie went to bed, they sat on Ryan's couch in the dark, neither ready for sleep, both dreading tomorrow's hearing. I'm terrified. Ryan's honesty came without apology. Not just of losing the hearing, though that scares me, but of what this is doing to Sophie. Every time the Pierces file something new, every time we go to court, she feels the instability. She's smart enough to know something's wrong, even if she doesn't understand what. Elena laced her fingers through his. After tomorrow, it'll be over. One way or another, we'll have certainty. What if the certainty is that I lose her? Then we deal with that too. Together. Ryan pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. You deserve someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. That's what love is, not finding someone perfect, but finding someone whose damage fits with yours in a way that makes both of you stronger. They made love that night, with an intensity born of uncertainty and need, Elena's body finally trusting what her mind had known for months, that Ryan was safe, that vulnerability didn't mean violation, that she was allowed to want this. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, and she felt something fundamental shift. This wasn't just physical connection. This was choosing each other despite impossible odds, building a life together in the wreckage of their separate catastrophes. The courthouse felt oppressive under gray morning skies. Sarah Mitchell met them in the lobby, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes carrying something that might have been optimism. The Pierce's motion is weak. Judge Morrison doesn't like her rulings being second-guessed. Unless they have genuinely new evidence, she's going to shut this down fast. The courtroom was the same as before. Same judge, same opposing counsel, same Richard and Catherine Pierce looking through Ryan like he was beneath acknowledgement. But something felt different. The Pierce's attorneys seemed less confident, their body language suggesting this was obligation rather than strategy. Judge Morrison called the hearing to order, reviewed the appeal motion, and looked at Victoria Hartman with barely concealed irritation. Ms. Hartman, your clients are appealing my custody ruling on the grounds that Mr. Matthews' relationship with Ms. Morgan constitutes a significant change in circumstances. I'm listening. Hartman stood, and her presentation felt perfunctory. Elena had seen enough courtrooms to recognize an attorney going through motions she didn't believe in. The evidence was thin. Photographs of Elena at Ryan's apartment, testimony from neighbors that she was there frequently, speculation about inappropriate influence on Sophie. Judge Morrison listened with increasing impatience. Ms. Hartman, Mr. Matthews' relationship with Ms. Morgan appears stable and committed. The child has adjusted well according to school reports. Ms. Morgan's journalism career is constitutionally protected activity and does not endanger the child. What exactly constitutes new evidence here? Hartman glanced at her clients, received a small nod, and continued. Your Honor, my clients are concerned about the rapid progression of the relationship, about Ms. Morgan's influence on Sophie, about the moral example being set. The judge's expression hardened. Are you suggesting there's something immoral about two adults in a committed relationship spending time together? Because I'm going to need you to be very specific about what moral failing you're alleging. The courtroom went silent. Hartman looked at Richard Pierce, and something passed between them, a decision being made in real time. Your Honor, my clients would like to request a brief recess to confer. 10 minutes. Elena watched the Pierces huddle with their attorneys in the hallway, saw the argument happening through the glass. Richard's face was red. Catherine looked strained. Victoria Hartman was speaking firmly, pointing at documents, and both Pierces were shaking their heads. When they reconvened, Hartman stood with visible reluctance. Your Honor, my clients have instructed me to withdraw the appeal motion. The courtroom erupted in quiet chaos. Sarah Mitchell looked stunned. Ryan gripped Elena's hand hard enough to hurt. Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose fractionally. You're withdrawing? In the middle of the hearing? Yes, Your Honor. My clients have decided not to pursue this matter further. Judge Morrison studied the Pierces for a long moment. Very well. The original custody arrangement stands. This court strongly encourages the Pierce family to focus their considerable resources on supporting Sophie's relationship with her father, rather than undermining it through repeated litigation. Her gaze moved to Ryan, and something almost gentle crossed her face. Mr. Matthews, you've shown remarkable resilience through this process. Continue being the father you've demonstrated yourself to be. Sophie is fortunate to have you. The gavel came down with finality. Elena felt Ryan shaking beside her, relief and confusion and exhaustion all flooding through him at once. They'd won again. Not just won, but won so decisively the Pierces had withdrawn mid-hearing. Outside, rain had started. Sarah pulled them aside, her professional mask slipping to show genuine satisfaction. I've never seen the Pierces retreat like that. Something changed. Maybe they finally realized they can't win. Or maybe the cost, financial and reputational, finally outweighed their obsession with control. Ryan seemed unable to process it. It's over? Actually over? Nothing in family law is permanently over until Sophie turns 18. But yes, barring some dramatic change, this fight is finished. You won. Elena watched Ryan absorb the victory, saw the exact moment 7 years of tension released from his shoulders. He'd been carrying the weight of potential loss so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be free of it. They were walking to the parking garage when a voice stopped them. "Mr. Matthews, Miss Morgan, may I have a moment?" Catherine Pierce stood alone, no attorneys flanking her, no husband providing backup. She looked older than Elena remembered, the custody battle having aged her visibly. "What do you want?" Ryan's voice carried justified wariness. "To apologize. Properly, not through lawyers." Catherine's composure cracked slightly. "When we lost Amanda, we lost our minds. She was our only child, our entire world. When she died, we convinced ourselves that controlling Sophie would fill that void. We were wrong." She met Ryan's eyes directly. "Watching you fight for Sophie these past months, seeing the love and dedication you've shown despite everything we put you through, it reminded us that Amanda chose you for a reason. She saw something in you that we were too blinded by grief and snobbery to recognize." Elena watched Ryan process this, saw him calculating whether to believe it. "Why now? Why withdraw the appeal?" "Because I saw the judge's face when Victoria tried to argue your relationship with Ms. Morgan was harmful. She was ready to sanction us for wasting the court's time. Because our attorneys warned us one more frivolous motion and we could lose visitation entirely. Because Richard and I are tired." Catherine's voice broke slightly. "We can't get Amanda back. Trying to replace you with money and influence won't bring her back either. All we can do is try to be the grandparents Sophie deserves. Supportive, loving, present without being controlling." Ryan stood silent for a long moment, rain falling around them. "I never wanted to keep Sophie from you. I just wanted you to respect that I'm her father. I know that now. I'm sorry it took a court order and multiple hearings to understand what should have been obvious from the beginning." Catherine turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Amanda would have liked you, Miss Morgan. She believed in fighting for what's right, even when it was difficult. You remind me of her." After she left, Ryan stood in the rain, processing. "Do you believe her?" Elena considered carefully. "I believe she's exhausted. I believe the legal costs and emotional toll finally outweighed their need for control. Whether that translates to genuine change or just strategic retreat, we'll see over time." "I should feel victorious. Why don't I feel victorious?" "Because victory over Sophie's grandparents wasn't what you wanted. You wanted them to love her without trying to erase you. Maybe now they'll learn how." 6 weeks after the appeal withdrawal, Sophie turned 7. Ryan planned a small party at his apartment, just a few school friends, pizza, cake, the kind of celebration that felt proportional to a child's actual desires rather than adult need for spectacle. Sophie spent the morning helping him decorate, hanging streamers with the concentrated determination she brought to important tasks. Elena arrived early, bearing gifts and the particular excitement of someone still learning how to exist in a child's orbit. The party was chaos in the best possible way. 7-year-olds running through the apartment, pizza consumed with maximum mess, cake reduced to crumbs and frosting. Through it all, Sophie glowed with happiness that had nothing to do with expensive gifts or elaborate entertainment. After the guests left and Ryan was cleaning up, Sophie pulled Elena aside to her room. She closed the door with exaggerated secrecy, sat on her bed, and looked at Elena with Amanda's serious eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Are you going to marry my daddy?" The question landed like a depth charge. Elena sat carefully on the bed beside Sophie, choosing words with extreme care. "Would that be okay with you if I did?" Sophie's face scrunched in thought. "My mommy's in heaven,
but I think she'd want Daddy to be happy. And you make him smile the way he used to smile with Mommy. I remember that smile from before. Elena felt her throat tighten. Your daddy loves you more than anything in the whole world. So do I. If he and I got married, we'd be a family. All three of us together. I know. That's why I want you to.
Sophie's simple certainty devastated Elena's careful defenses.
Families stay together, right? That's what you're supposed to do?
That's exactly what you're supposed to do. The door opened. Ryan stood in the doorway, and his expression suggested he'd heard at least part of the conversation. He crossed to the bed, knelt so he was at Sophie's eye level. Sophie, baby, can I tell you something important?
Okay.
I want to marry Elena, but I wanted to make sure you were okay with it first, because you're my daughter, and your opinion matters more than anything. Sophie threw her arms around his neck.
I'm okay with it, Daddy. I love Elena. She's nice and she helps with homework, and she doesn't mind when Mr. Hoppers sits on her lap during movies.
Ryan laughed through tears, pulled Elena into the embrace, and the three of them sat on Sophie's bed, surrounded by birthday decorations and stuffed animals, becoming a family in the most official way possible. Is that a yes? Elena's voice came thick with emotion. That's a yes. Always yes. Ryan pulled a small box from his pocket. He'd been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment. The ring was simple, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, elegant without ostentation. I know we've only been together 7 months. I know this is fast by conventional standards. But nothing about us has been conventional, and I don't want to wait. Will you marry me, Elena Morgan?
Yes, 1,000 times yes.
He slipped the ring on her finger, and Sophie clapped with the pure joy of a child watching her world become stable and secure and whole. The months that followed brought gradual normalization. The Pierces' visits continued, 3 weekends per month as mandated, but the tone shifted. Catherine brought age-appropriate gifts instead of extravagant displays. Richard actually asked about Ryan's work, showed tentative respect for his professional expertise. They were still formal, still wealthy people, struggling to connect with their granddaughter's working-class reality, but they were trying. Sophie's 8th birthday came and went. The Pierces sent a card and a college savings bond, appropriate and thoughtful. Elena's journalism career flourished. A second major expose on pharmaceutical pricing went viral, earning her recognition as someone unafraid of powerful targets. The months that followed brought gradual normalization. The Pierces' visits continued, 3 weekends per month as mandated, but the tone shifted. Catherine brought age-appropriate gifts instead of extravagant displays. Richard actually asked about Ryan's work, showed tentative respect. They were still formal, still wealthy people struggling to connect with their granddaughter's working-class reality, but they were trying. 18 months after the mountain cabin, Ryan and Elena married at the same retreat where they'd met. Small ceremony, Sophie as flower girl taking her role with utmost seriousness. The Pierces attended, sitting stiffly but present. Catherine's RSVP had read, "We're grateful to witness Sophie's family becoming whole." When Ryan and Elena kissed, Sophie cheered loud enough to make everyone laugh. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real and chosen. And theirs. 2 years after the mountain cabin, Elena woke in the home she now shared with Ryan and Sophie, a house they'd bought together in a neighborhood with good schools and a park nearby. Sunday morning light filtered through curtains, and the smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. She found Ryan and Sophie making pancakes together, Sophie standing on a step stool, carefully pouring batter while Ryan supervised. The ritual had evolved to include her, the recipe expanding to accommodate a family of 3.
Did you know Elena had never made pancakes before she met us?
Sophie's voice carried the particular satisfaction of someone sharing important information. I didn't, but your dad's a good teacher.
Mommy Amanda was the first teacher. Then Daddy learned. Now we're teaching you. That's how families work.
The casual inclusion of Amanda,
Acknowledgement without pain showed how far they'd all come. Sophie remembered her mother through stories and photographs and recipes, keeping her memory alive without being trapped by it. The doorbell rang mid-morning. Catherine and Richard Pierce stood on the porch, dressed casually by their standards, carrying a wrapped gift. "We brought Sophie's birthday present early. I hope that's all right." Sophie ran to greet them, and Elena watched the Pierces soften in her presence. They would never be warm grandparents, would probably always carry themselves with a particular stiffness of old money and rigid values. But they'd learned to show up without trying to take over, to be part of Sophie's life without dominating it. They stayed for lunch, conversation strained but functional. Richard asked Elena about her latest investigation, showed genuine interest when she described exposing corporate environmental violations. Catherine complimented Sophie's piano skills without the implicit criticism of Ryan that used to accompany such observations. After they left, Sophie curled up on the couch between Ryan and Elena, Mr. Hoppers tucked under one arm, a library book open in her lap. "This is my favorite kind of day. All of us together, and nobody has to go anywhere." Ryan pulled her close, met Elena's eyes over their daughter's head. "Mine too, baby. Mine too." Elena rested her hand on Sophie's shoulder, feeling the solid reality of their family. 3 people who'd found each other through trauma and custody battles and mountain cabins, who'd built something real from wreckage and determination and the stubborn belief that love mattered more than money. Sophie looked up, studying Ryan's face with Amanda's serious eyes. "Daddy, do you remember when you were sad all the time? Before Elena came?" "I remember, sweetheart." "You don't look sad anymore. You look happy." "I am happy. Because I have you. And I have Elena. And we have each other." Sophie nodded, satisfied with this explanation, and returned to her book. But Elena saw the truth in Ryan's eyes, that this ordinary Sunday morning represented everything he'd fought for. Not wealth or status or validation from people who didn't matter. Just the simple gift of being home with people he loved, building a life that measured success in presence rather than possessions. Evening found them on the couch again, Sophie asleep between them, the house quiet except for rain against the windows. Ryan's voice came soft, reflective. "I learned something through all of this. That a father's worth isn't measured in bank statements or prestigious addresses. That showing up every day matters more than any grand gesture. That the right person sees value where the world sees lack." He looked at Sophie, then at Elena. And that families don't have to be perfect to be whole. They just have to choose each other every single day and build something worth fighting for. Elena laced her fingers through his, the sapphire ring catching lamplight. "Sophie was right all along. Families stay together. That's what you're supposed to do." Outside, Seattle rain continued its steady rhythm. Inside, warmth and light and the quiet contentment of people who'd survived impossible odds and discovered that survival was only the beginning. The real victory was learning to live fully despite the damage, to love deeply despite the fear, to fight fiercely for what mattered even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Ryan Matthews had started as an invisible man fighting impossible battles. He'd found someone who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. Together they'd build a family from broken pieces, proving that sometimes the most damaged souls recognize healing in each other, and that worth has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with the courage to show up, day after day, for the people who matter most. The story that began in a mountain cabin with 2 strangers and nightmares ended in a home filled with pancakes and piano music and the particular magic of ordinary love. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and chosen and worth every moment of the fight.